let's take a look at some of the bones of the skull. So this is a human skull, and in this video we are solely going to look at the bones themselves. In a different video we'll look at the bone markings. So let's first start with this big bone up front, right? This is known as your frontal bone, which makes up your forehead. Okay, this is the frontal bone, and here we're looking at an anterior view. This is your frontal bone here. As we move posterior or back, right, we have our paired parietal bones. We have a left parietal and we have a right parietal, and notice that it's the patient's left and right. So here's our skull here looking this way, right? So here you have your right parietal, left parietal, frontal, parietal, parietal. As we continue posteriorly, right, we're going to see the occipital bone back here. So the occipital bone sets posterior to the parietal and sort of wraps underneath or ventrally or inferiorly in a human. Okay, so you have your occipital, parietal, parietal, frontal. Let's take a look at the sort of anterior view here. We can see our frontal bone here. We can see the nasal bone, which makes up the nose. And we can see our maxilla here. And we're going to zoom in a little bit on the orbit so that we can see a little bit more of the orbit, right? And here we have, this is our nasal. This is our maxilla here. And if we go posterior to the maxilla, we're going to see this small bone here known as the lacrimal bone. And then posterior to the lacrimal bone is going to be this bone here, which is your ethmoid. This is the ethmoid. So ethmoid, lacrimal, maxilla, nasal. And if we sort of spin it this way, right, we can see this bone back here, right, this bone back here. This is your sphenoid bone, okay? And then you have your zygomatic bone. So this is the zygomatic here, okay? So zygomatic, maxilla, nasal, lacrimal, sphenoid, or ethmoid, and sphenoid back here, okay? Turn it and look at a lateral view. Here we have our lateral view. This is our zygomatic here, makes up the cheekbone, zygomatic. This is your sphenoid bone, and then your temporal. This is all temporal here, and this little bit right here is the temporal bone as well. And then you have the mandible. Okay. Flip this over, let's take a look at the ventral view. We have our maxilla, we have the palatine, and this makes up your hard palate. Okay, here we have the vomer. This is your vomer here. Okay, you're going to see part of the sphenoid bone, and then your occipital bone. Your occipital bone is going to have the big hole in it. Okay, it's called the foramen magnum. The big hole, that's your occipital bone. Let's take it, flip it back over. Let's take a look at the dorsal view and take the top part of the skull off so we can look inside of the brain case here. Right, and we're going to zoom out just a little bit so that we can see. Okay, here we have our frontal bone, right? So this is going to be the frontal bone. Here you have the ethmoid. The ethmoid. Remember the ethmoid, you could see a bit inside of the orbit. Okay, here's your ethmoid. Posterior to the ethmoid, you have the sphenoid bone, and here you can see that quintessential sort of like butterfly shape of the sphenoid bone. So here's your sphenoid. Okay, so remember you can see the sphenoid as part of the cheek as well out here, right? So sphenoid, sphenoid. Okay, and then you have your occipital bone back here, and then you have your temporal bone here, right? So look, temporal, and then there's your temporal there, and temporal. Okay, so frontal, ethmoid, sphenoid, occipital, temporal. Okay, and those are the bones of the skull.